As a pilot, I've been flying with British Airways for more than 25 years, 15 of those years as a captain. Research tells us that approximately 1 in 4 people are very nervous or very apprehensive about flying. So the first message is, you are not alone. Approximately 6 years ago, another captain, Peter Hughes, and myself decided to set up some courses to help people like yourselves overcome your fears. To date, we've run over more than 100 of those courses, and we've seen over 8,000 people. And I can say with great confidence that the vast majority of those people are now flying very comfortably and very happily. We have a great deal of experience with helping people like yourselves, but I must point out that there is no magic cure to help you overcome your fear. You have to work hard and you have to apply yourself continuously. But you've taken the first step in overcoming your fears by actually watching this video. I would ask you to watch the film several times, and particularly just before you take your next flight.
I felt panic, sheer raw panic, which started in my feet and worked upwards. I suppose I would have killed to get out of an aeroplane. It was as bad as that.
If you think you're afraid of flying, you're certainly not alone.
As I got on the plane, I'm as calm, just sit there, doesn't matter. And as soon as the engines come on, I just really get paranoid. Cannot move, I even get frightened thinking of it.
It's just the actual sensation of being out of control, I think, and just being unaware of what could happen. It's the gripping sensation on the seat. In fact, when I do fly, I have to drink a hell of a lot.
Sheer panic. I suffer from claustrophobia, and I haven't flown for 27 years, and I have to go to America in January, and I realized that I had to do something about it.
Research suggests that 1 in 3 people are apprehensive about flying, and that there are more than 30 million people in Britain and in the USA who are either terrified in the air or who refuse to fly and remain earthbound.
I'm one of the lucky ones. I've flown a great deal and it doesn't worry me, although I must confess to a slight tightening of the muscles every time the plane's about to lift off the runway and every time it lands. But for many people, perhaps as many as 1 in 10 of us, it's much, much worse. In fact, it can be totally overpowering. But thanks to research and the practical work done by various doctors and psychologists and pilots and cabin crew, all working together, it's something which can be overcome.
I actually feel very good. I feel happier than I did before I came today. I was able to take the flight without any alcohol, which was a real achievement for me.
What did you think of the flight?
Great.
Did you?
Yes, it's my first time.
You'll go again?
I will. Yes, great.
I feel absolutely fantastic, really, in the sense that being that I've achieved something that I've wanted to do all my life and never ever had the courage to do.
Very good.
Did you?
Very good indeed.
You feel confident now?
Yes, very nice. Well, I think my daughter's, she's achieved something, yes.
Knowing what the noises were, and that did help a great deal. So I think I might take just the flight next time.
Good.
Ah, yes, you say, but those people never felt the way I feel. Well, that's true. They may not have felt the way you feel, but that's the first step towards overcoming your fear of flying, to identify how you feel, when you feel it, and how strong the feeling is. We ask you to watch A Little Miracle of Flight. When Concorde first took off, a lot of people were worried, and not just those who were afraid of flying. Not surprising. Concorde looked like a schoolboy's paper dart, difficult to tell where the fuselage ended and the wing began, flying so fast it might end up in the wrong place, and generally unpredictable, because it seemed to defy some basic laws of nature. Even more people were worried when the first 747 or jumbo jet flew. How could such a large lump of metal and plastic, capable of carrying 550 passengers, possibly defy gravity and go on defying gravity as it plied across the oceans of the world?
Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And in reality, those two aircraft have proved to be among the safest, if not the safest, in the history of aviation. And the reason is, of course, that aircraft designers and aviation engineers really know what they're doing these days. Mind you, it wasn't always so. Well, of course, one of the major causes of fear of flying is that ordinary mortals don't understand how an aeroplane functions, what keeps it up, how it can be controlled, and why in many of its movements nature is on the side of the passenger, and the crew, of course. And let's take this moment to say a word about the crew, because they're the human factor in controlling an aircraft.
What you should remember is that if anything were to go wrong, they are just as likely to suffer as you, their passenger. And they don't want to suffer, not at all. They have interesting lives, just like you, and they intend to go on enjoying them. In that most of us are a bit selfish, they place their safety just as high as yours. The same might be said of a person crossing the road, or a car driver, except for one essential difference. Flight crew, captains, co-pilots, engineers, all have to undergo regular tests of fitness and performance by the independent aviation authorities, twice a year in most cases. They also have to undergo stringent training, right from the word go, both in actual flight and with hours on the ground in simulators, which are cheaper to operate than actual aircraft, but just as realistic. And if they fail a test, they have to go right back to basics. Although they operate a highly complex piece of machinery with a sophisticated instrument panel, they know those display panels just as well as a driver knows the display panel of his or her car. But the difference is that pilots know the systems behind the instruments and how they work, and therefore the reasons for what readings are showing.
So, trust your pilot. Part of the business of becoming a pilot is understanding the principles of flight. And so it should be for the passenger. After all, you're entrusting your life to that machine and its operators. It makes good sense, therefore, to understand what's going on and how the main components function. And research has shown that that is a very important factor in fear of flying. People tend to be afraid of things they don't know about. So let's spend a few moments looking at why an aircraft is a safe mode of transport and how it uses the principles of nature to help it.
What goes up must come down is a law of nature, and certainly every aircraft which goes up does come down. The question is, how? Well, what keeps an aircraft up is its wings, and the way those wings move through the air. The wings are curved, so that air passing over the top surface has to travel further than air passing underneath. In doing so, it speeds up and loses pressure and weight compared to the air below. So, as the wing moves forward, the high pressure of the heavy air underneath pushes it up into the low pressure of the lighter air above, and the aircraft flies.
Well, there's a little more to it than that, of course. In every flying machine, be it a schoolboy's paper dart or a jumbo jet, there are actually 4 forces at work.
Basically, though, it's a simple matter of counteracting the downward pull of gravity. In other words, the weight of the aircraft with lift from the aerodynamic shape of the wings and overcoming drag, in other words, friction with the air, by thrust from the engines.
But unlike a train, which can only move forwards or backwards, a car, which can move forwards or backwards or turn a corner, an aircraft can move along a third axis. It can climb or descend.
Every aircraft uses a variety of movable surfaces to achieve this under control of the pilot, and it's as well to know about these because they can sometimes be heard by passengers and sometimes seen. Flaps on the wings help the plane to take off and land. You can watch those moving. And slats in front of the wing move forward and downwards to help the aircraft to achieve more lift at slower speeds. You can see and hear those moving too. Then there are the ailerons. Now they allow the aircraft to make smooth turns by banking. One goes up, the other goes down. They increase the curve of the wing. You can't hear them, but you can see them. Well, to help the ailerons, there are so-called spoilers on each wing. Now they act as air brakes, and they have a distinctive sound when applied. They help in banking, they help in landing by slowing the aircraft down, and they help after landing to keep the aircraft on the ground. Then on the tail, there are the elevators, another set of movable surfaces which help the aircraft to climb or come down. And finally, the rudder. It helps to steer the plane left or right, but you won't see it or hear it unless you happen to have missed your flight and be left behind on the ground.
Well, having looked at the body and the wings of the aircraft and the bits that move, let's say a word about the engine.
The engines on a modern jet airliner are quite something. They have to go on performing faultlessly at high speed, often for hours, many hours, without a pause. Each engine is made of the finest metals and manufactured to the highest possible standards. Quality assurance is applied all down the line at the manufacturing stage. Prototypes are tested many, many times beyond the maximum time an engine would ever spend in flight. Each engine is taken out of service at regular intervals, stripped down and inspected minutely. And it's inspected before and after every flight. In fact, it's the captain's responsibility to inspect everything on the outside of his aircraft and discuss things with the technical crew on the ground before every flight.
But even if something were to go wrong with an engine, the plane is still able to fly without it, or without two in the case of a four-engined aircraft, and it still wouldn't impair the flying performance of the whole plane.
And even if all the engines were to stop, the plane wouldn't drop like a stone. It would glide for more than 170 miles, probably, or half an hour, during which time all sorts of corrective action could be taken by the flight crew.
So don't worry about the engines. They're constantly being checked and monitored. And remember, the flight crew rely on them just as much as you.
Perhaps it would be helpful now if we were to follow a flight through from takeoff to landing to see exactly what happens. But before we do that, there's another procedure to be explained. Calculating the total weight of the aircraft before it takes off, how much fuel should be loaded aboard, and how long it should race along the runway before it leaves the ground. All these are worked out specifically for each flight, because of course they vary from flight to flight. That's why your luggage is weighed at check-in. You are not, because an average is taken for each passenger and hand baggage, but the number of passengers is counted, as is the weight of any cargo. Now, these factors affect the amount of fuel which is loaded aboard, as does the distance to be flown and the cruising height. The thinner the air, the less fuel used, although a very wide margin is allowed. It may take up to a minute before the airliner leaves the ground. Now, don't be alarmed if it does. The total weight of the aircraft determines the speed necessary for takeoff.
80 knots. Rotate.
This speed, known as velocity 1, or V1, is calculated by the flight crew before the plane starts taxiing. Up to that speed, it's possible to put all the brakes on, put the engines into reverse, and stop the takeoff. Now, some passengers may get a sensation of falling when this takes place. Well, they're not, of course, but the feeling is due to the mechanism of the inner ear adjusting slightly. One good way to counteract it is to take a deep breath at the moment of takeoff. Right, we're airborne. And within minutes, you'll hear and feel the undercarriage being retracted. The aircraft is then set to climb at a new speed known as V2, a speed calculated to set it at the best angle of climb for its takeoff weight. It'll be steeper than at takeoff, perhaps 15 or 20 degrees, And it feels steeper, but that's all quite normal. As the aircraft levels out between 1,000 and 1,500 feet, the engine noise will change. Power is cut deliberately by about 10% to avoid making too much noise for the people living on the ground below. But soon the speed will increase again. The flaps on the wings will retract, and the aircraft will begin cruising, and everybody settles down. It's at this point that meals or drinks are usually served. And perhaps here we should add a warning about alcohol. Alcohol may make some people relax, but in the pressurized cabin of an aircraft, it can make you tipsy in half the normal time. And it can make any jet lag worse after a long flight. So try to limit it to 1 glass. Okay, so we're cruising and enjoying ourselves. But what are the flight crew doing up front? Sitting there with their feet up? Playing dominoes? Or what? Well, none of those things. Although they have probably switched on the autopilot, which will keep the plane flying smoothly and evenly while they pay attention to other things. Now, one thing they'll be doing is keeping in touch with air traffic control.
Speedbird 560 Quebec, we're maintaining Mach decimal 83 now. Revised estimate for Kakira is on the hour.
It's air traffic control's job to keep all aircraft in their particular area safely separated. Separated by at least 5 miles horizontally and at least 1,000 feet vertically. Each air traffic control center has its own area of responsibility, or sector, and each overlaps others. Looking down, it's like a series of intersecting circles. All the aircraft in the sector are kept under radar control all the time. Transponders fitted to the aircraft automatically send and receive signals. And there's also voice contact between the pilots and the air traffic controllers.
Roger, that's all copied. Descend 6,000 feet, 1013. We have Oscar. And runway 25. 8 Whiskey.
Each airliner has its own radar as well, but this is used to keep an eye on the weather ahead. The aircraft navigates using a series of beacons on the ground. Each has its own transmitting frequency, and so the receiver in the cockpit has to be retuned each time a new beacon comes in range. The course of the aircraft adjusted accordingly. Finally, the crew will be checking different systems and procedures against checklists, calling them out to each other.
Of all the fears that passengers have, turbulence is the most common. People like to be in control, but unless you're the pilot, you're not in control, so don't know what is going on, unless he perhaps tells you from the flight deck on the passenger address. One of the statements I frequently make to nervous passengers is that turbulence is uncomfortable but is not dangerous. Please try and remember that. Turbulence is uncomfortable but is not dangerous. The turbulence that frightens you so readily in an aircraft would not disturb you nearly so much, if at all, if you were to experience it on a boat on a choppy sea, or perhaps in a car travelling over a rough road. Certainly, turbulence is uncomfortable, and on a few occasions may cause air sickness, but this is a relatively rare occurrence. Passengers expect an aircraft to fly smoothly all the time, and like most other forms of transport, occasionally progress is not totally smooth. Most flights are conducted with very little turbulence, but from time to time you will experience some turbulence. Pilots don't like turbulence any more than you do. That is not to say that they are frightened of it, but they will do their best to avoid it, for they know that passengers don't like it either, and it makes the job of the cabin crew that much more difficult. If the pilot thinks that he is likely to enter an area of bad weather that may cause turbulence, then he will put the seatbelt sign on and possibly make a passenger address announcement. If he's too busy, then the senior cabin crew member will make the announcement for him. The fact that the seatbelt sign has come on does not mean that the aircraft is going to break up or become uncontrollable. Modern aircraft are far too strong and well made for that. But it does mean that if you were standing in the aisle, there could be a possibility you could fall over, and so it's better to return to your seat. Airlines are very conscious of the well-being of their passengers and go to great lengths to achieve this.
But let's just say a few words about lightning, the weather event which seems to worry passengers most. It is impossible for lightning to penetrate to the inside of a plane or to interfere with the controls.
Now, the reason is that the metal exterior of the plane makes a perfect metal conductor, as has been proven in scientific tests as well as in actual flight. The worst you would experience would be a flash and a bang, but no danger. The lightning is simply conducted away into the atmosphere. On a long-distance flight, the aircraft may start its descent more than 100 miles from the airport. Now, often these days, the plane will be held for a while before landing. It may be held in a stack of aircraft, all at different heights, circling the airport until air traffic control gives it clearance to come in and land. Sometimes the engines may rev up to raise the aircraft a little, perhaps to avoid some bumpy layer of cloud. All quite normal. About 5 miles from the airport, while still half a mile high, the aircraft will begin its final descent. For this, pilots use an instrument landing system, or ILS, to help them. It's like flying in on 2 radio beams, and it can actually be used to land the aircraft completely automatically, should visibility be poor. During the final approach, the undercarriage is lowered, that has a distinctive noise, and the flaps are fully extended to slow the aircraft down. The manner in which the aircraft flies during the last 50 feet above the ground and its stopping position on the runway is another calculation carefully worked out by the crew. It depends on the weight of the aircraft, its load, the weather conditions, and whether the runway is slippery, but there's always a huge margin of safety. Close to the runway, the pilot lifts the nose and gently throttles back. Now, modern jets are designed to land on their wing wheels and then tilt down onto their front wheels.
No problem.
The plane actually comes to a halt by thrusting its engines into reverse, as well as applying its wheel brakes. Now, this reverse thrust produces a great deal of noise.
80 knots. Reverse idle. I have control. Thank you very much.
So, now we're back on the ground. And I hope you understand, by understanding how the aircraft works, why flying is not a miracle, but a little bit of magic based on sound engineering principles. It's also rather fun. Plane accidents are very, very rare. On average, only 1 crash involving fatalities occurs per million flights, and you'd have to fly every day until you're 95 to stand a statistical chance of experiencing one. Furthermore, in 6 out of 10 accidents where there are fatalities, there are also survivors. Ah, yes, you say, but how can I be sure that it won't be my plane that crashes and that it'll be me who survives? Well, of course, you can't be sure, unless you have a hotline to fate, that is. But you can learn how to reduce anxiety, and you can learn how to relax. And remember, the benefits of being confident about flying are enormous, both from a business and a holiday point of view. Now, first, we'll look at the problem of anxiety. In other words, your mental approach to flying.
Many of you have experienced the physical symptoms of your fear of flying: sweaty palms, tingling fingers, dizziness, and even nausea. This is a typical reaction brought on by hyperventilation or overbreathing. Your body is being prepared for flight or fight, and you take in extra oxygen. As you do not expend this in physical exertion, your body chemistry is upset, and the symptoms described earlier result. Your own reaction is to be further upset by the way you feel, and anxiety will continue to rise. You can help to control this by deliberately slowing down your breathing and then relaxing and tensing all your muscles in a positive effort to relieve tension. Not only does this provide a relief for those typical symptoms of hyperventilation, but it will give you something positive to concentrate on and take your mind off the flight ahead. These exercises can be done at any time prior to your flight or on board the aircraft itself. Remember, at any time you feel anxiety beginning to rise, you'll notice your breathing will increase with a tendency for short, shallow breaths from your chest. Slow this down by positively breathing from your stomach, and deliberately tense and relax all your muscles in turn, starting with your feet and moving up to your shoulders and neck.
The higher you fly, the thinner the air becomes, and so cabins of all commercial airliners, which mostly fly between 25,000 and 40,000 feet, are pressurized to stay roughly the same as on the ground. The air is drawn in from outside and then pumped into the cabin after it's been warmed for passenger comfort. It's actually changed every 2 minutes. But some passengers find they breathe just a tiny bit faster while they're airborne, and using the diaphragm muscles rather than the chest muscles helps to prevent that. Back now to mental attitude. Now, the secret is to change negative thoughts into positive ones. Not to think, what happens if? But to think, when I get there, I'll be able to do so-and-so. Or the advantages of flying instead of going by some other form of transport are that, and so on. Keep thinking of the good things. Keep thinking of the benefits.
Another secret is to reduce your thinking ahead time, to think only about the next 5 minutes, and then when you've got there, the next 5 minutes after that, and so on. It helps a lot of people. After all, it's how you perceive flying that's crucial, not the reality of flying itself. The reality is that flying is very, very safe, a 1 in a million chance of an accident. Yet some people perceive it as being very unsafe.
But it's possible to alter that perception. For example, statistics show that most people die in bed. In theory, therefore, we should be afraid of going to bed. But we perceive bed in real life as somewhere warm, comfortable and cozy, not as a place where we might die. Why the different attitude? Well, because we know enough about bed and we have enough experience of going to bed that we no longer think of it as something associated with death.
The key to overcoming fear of flying is to know a lot more about it, and if possible, to go on an actual flight, with perhaps some support and help at first.
Welcome to all of you.
That is possible too. There are day-long fear of flying courses for which anyone can enroll, where the anxious person first of all meets other anxious people, where the workings of a modern airliner are explained in simple terms by experienced airline captains, who then answer questions, where the psychology which lies behind a fear of flying and similar phobias, such as a fear of lifts, is explained, and where practical exercises are taught, culminating in an actual flight lasting about an hour from an international airport and back. During this practical exercise, anyone may withdraw at any point, but 99% continue and go through check-in, security, waiting in the passenger lounge, boarding the aircraft, and then a complete flight from takeoff to landing with an experienced flight crew and cabin crew, all of whom are volunteers, just there to help people overcome their anxieties. During the flight, a captain keeps up a running commentary on everything that's happening. Cabin staff answer questions or give reassurance. Passengers are invited to visit the flight deck or move around in the cabin as much as they wish. The flight lasts roughly an hour, and it's been nicknamed the happy hour because, generally speaking, that describes the mood of most passengers.
What did you think of it?
Quite incredible, incredible. Never been on an aeroplane before, but I will definitely go again.
I feel very tired, but I feel much better because I'm not drunk like I'm usually when I get off the flight. So I think from now on I will feel a lot better.
Well, it was really lovely, thank you very much. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I should be all right now.
I enjoyed the flight today, and I'll certainly enjoy the next one. I want to go again. I want to go now.
What did you think of the flight?
Brilliant, really brilliant.
I really feel very good about myself and really happy because normally I do take tranquilizers, and today I've had absolutely nothing, and I feel very confident for the next time I fly.
Afterwards, there's usually a debriefing session and an invitation to return for a further happy hour flight if the passenger feels in need of still more reassurance.
Now, hopefully after that, flying will no longer be perceived as a threat, but as a positive challenge, and eventually an enjoyable experience. Remember, a flight is actually a purchase, so do your homework before you purchase. I'm sure you'll be well satisfied with what you've bought.
Terrific.
Terrific.
Yes,
Fantastic.
wonderful.
Yes, very good.
We hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you've learned something from it. We have also produced a book and an audio tape, which used in conjunction with this videotape will help you overcome your fears. If you are interested in one of these items, or indeed attending one of our Fear of Flying courses, then details will follow at the end of the video.